The street outside is asleep. Past midnight, when the last cars have bled away and the subways have given up their final echoes. This is when I usually work, microphone in hand, chasing the kind of clean ambient textures that only silence can give. I wanted nothing more than the hum of a refrigerator, the muffled breath of pipes, the barely audible shifting of air. A floor of neutrality. That's all. I placed the recorder on the windowsill, set to capture 30 minutes unbroken. I sat in the dark, notebook open, but mostly ignored. I didn't hear anything odd in the room. Just the usual low roof tick, a radiator creak. My own breathing. The city turned small, almost cozy, outside the glass. When I first replayed it, I thought it had failed. The sound came back heavier, anchored by something beneath that wasn't present in the room at the time. It started faint, like an air conditioner in another apartment. But the longer I listened, the thicker it became. A pulse, a hum, the kind that settles in a steady rhythm, as if mimicking a body function. Not irregular, not faltering. Precise. Headphones seal you to the world. With them clamped tight, the hum no longer seemed background. It pressed forward, carving its own path. My ears adjusted, and I noticed it aligned with nothing mechanical nearby. Power lines give themselves away with irregular spacing. Refrigerators switch cycles. This kept time. Confident. I leaned into the waveform visualization. Peaks rose on intervals I could measure against my notebook ruler. Every 4 seconds on the dot, a swell. Every 4, a second rise. Patterns so uniform they felt man-made. Yet no source had been feeding my equipment. Just a single recorder, set alone in the dark. Inside those swells came other details, at first so faint I convinced myself it was just bias. My brain filling gaps. Fragments hovering in static. Consonants not fully formed. The half-shapes of vowels dragged through a throat no one controlled. I slowed the playback, trimmed pieces, looped them. Again and again, the same impression returned. Not words in any language I could name, but speech-like forms. The kind that brush up to human recognition before falling back into noise. For a while I forced myself to laugh. Power interference. Maybe a neighbor's wireless leak, bleeding across a thin line. That's what I told myself in the notebook. Except the cadence refuted it. Signals that drift don't hold ivory-toothed precision. Static doesn't count like a clock. And still it did. I took the recorder off the sill, pressed the mic between my palms, and tracked what was on the file against the air. Nothing matched. In the flesh, here and now, the room was neutral. On tape, entirely different. That mismatch gnawed. Because once I recognized it, I couldn't release it. Two realities, the lived silence and the artificial hum. One of them waiting, hidden, triggered only when the tape came to life. I rubbed at my ears. They rang long after playback paused, as though the sound had drilled through, leaving its silhouette in the canal. I thought about sleep, but the thought lodged crooked. The file ran again, and I watched the clock. The pattern never deviated. I stretched the signal out, lowered its speed until time itself seemed to bend. That's when I noticed fragments repeating at mathematically perfect ratios. 4 seconds stretched became 8, then 16, then 32. Each doubling produced the same contour of pulses, identical at every layer. Infinite replication, fractal uniformity. Not fluctuation, but intention. My apartment shrank around me. Every light bulb hummed, or maybe my nerves only pretended. I left them off, sat in that shadowed, still rectangle of space, and traced the figures in my notes. The pattern filled the paper clean, like an equation slowly revealing itself. I wondered if I was even meant to hear it, or if I had stumbled into some underlayer reserved for instruments. Not ears. The worst part arrived when I closed my eyes. Because that's when I could swear the cadence thumped in my chest. Not through hearing, but through bone and blood. My pulse fought with it, out of step, until I felt a weight adjust and sink. For a minute, my own heart moved in sympathy with what the recorder had lodged inside. That scared me enough to shut everything. Laptop closed. Recorder sealed. Headphones placed carefully face down. I paced the room, inhaled sharp air, tried to convince muscle, and thought both that this was ordinary. Nothing conspiratorial. A bad night of audio artifacting, but doubt poured through every crack. Because why would an error keep such careful rhythm? Why would static whisper almost words in looping form? Why would silence yield a living breath? I returned to the notebook and wrote only one line at the page bottom. It wasn't scientific. It was confession. Something is here. I wanted desperately to be finished. To drop it in a drawer and forget. I couldn't. The file kept pulling. Even closed, it hummed in memory. I promised myself clarity would come if I checked spectrum logs tomorrow. With comparison, maybe an explanation simple enough to dissolve panic. But for tonight, my body wouldn't let go. Curiosity tied my hands. Instead of sleeping, I set the recorder running again. Propped it on the shelf this time. Left it alone, recording empty darkness. My chest already tight with dread. I left it there because part of me needed to know if the hum would return. If the whispers would gather again, and in the silence before sleep. I swore I could already hear it building, faint and patient. Waiting to be caught once more, I woke to the recorder still sitting where I left it. Its red light unblinking, as if it had never turned off. My chest hurt from the lack of real sleep. Coffee steadied me enough to drag the files into the laptop. Waveforms spilled across the screen, most unremarkable. But then, inside the spectrogram view, something sharpened. Peaks at neat, repeated intervals, 22 kilohertz apart, like the ridges of a saw running perfectly across the dial. Not fuzz, not drift. Teeth carved into the noise. I held my breath, leaned closer until my eyes stung. Simple interference is sloppy, scattershot. These spikes stood like sentinels, equidistant, timed. I ran the program's spectral cascade, a falling waterfall of frequency over time. That's when colors unfurled where none should have existed, unnatural blooms dragging upward, faint but symmetrical. The screen painted shapes that didn't belong to sound. They pulsed into being, then faded, as if fed from somewhere precise and deliberate. I captured screenshots, 3, then 12, then another series across hours. Each one bore the same mark. I compared filters, adjusted gain, cross-checked against city broadcast towers. Nothing accounted for the spacing. Everything familiar suffered drift, scatter, or sudden collapse. Not this. These lines held like cords under tension. For a moment I stared not with curiosity but fear. Because perfection is rare. Nature loves chaos. Only engineered systems repeat with such flawless symmetry. I tapped into online logs kept by amateur radio trackers. Midnight ramblers, hobbyists, satellite chasers. Buried in a handful of posts 2 nights old, I found them marveling over peculiar gaps. Every 22 kilohertz. Their instruments refused to fill in the void, leaving empty stair steps along the band. Glitch, one wrote. Spectrum tearing, another said. But the recurring intervals matched mine exactly. My eyes skimmed until the timestamp jolted me. Their posts captured anomalies the day before mine, and then they vanished. The threads stopped after a single round of discussion. Profiles dormant, threads locked. The URLs still existed, but every download left me only with half-corrupted .wav files. Cropped abruptly. Gaps gnawed across the audio like teeth marks. I played those broken remnants anyway. They snapped and hissed. Between ruins of sound, faint echoes rose. Tones stitched like fine fabric, ripped just enough to show hidden weave. I thought of loom patterns. Strange thought for audio. But that's what it reminded me of design. A pattern woven under ordinary noise, barely kept from unraveling. My pulse wouldn't calm. My chest thumped faster with every loop. I flipped to spectrum again, watching blooms unfurl with luminous care. They behaved not like random music, but like signals rehearsing choreography. Emerging, expanding shapes, color coursing upward. A voice without words, pacing itself in ritual. I told myself I was only collecting data, nothing more. An exercise. A scientist might laugh at my lack of rigor, my scrambled bedroom station. Yet the longer I tracked, the more my own language betrayed me. I didn't say if, I said when. Not noise, but hum. Not artifact, but pattern. I shifted nouns without noticing. The forums confirmed what my gut already whispered. Sudden migraines. That was the phrase written in half a dozen posts on different nights, scattered across continents. Users who tuned to the same band described ice picks behind their eyes. One man claimed his vision strobed with light, though his radio produced only sound. Another said his child woke screaming, blood dripping from their nose the exact hour he scanned the band. Skeptics posted too, mocking. But even their derision faltered in the face of uniform numbers. Because the spacing was irrefutable. 22 kilohertz apart, repeating until the band fell silent the following day. Gone after a day. Each time, not drifting away but erased. Logs emptied. Spectral holes sanded over. As if something swept the stage clean the moment curtain call expired. I scrawled notes across the wall above my desk, curling arrows between scribbled figures. The page filled faster than I expected. 4 o'clock. 6 o'clock. My treble bleed calendar of spikes, blossoming like adamant flowers. I wanted to tell myself this was simple. Like atmospheric scatter. Like solar dust. But my skin prickled with doubt. Solar scatter doesn't post itself with precision, then retreat. It writhes. This reclined. Solar dust doesn't pair itself across amateur radio logs in different languages, neatly erased afterward. This felt curated. By midnight, the room grew claustrophobic. Lights hum louder when you're at edge of thought. I closed my eyes and the blooms glowed behind eyelids, same repeating shapes, pulsing upward like animated ghosts. I rubbed them away, and they stayed. I forced myself to step back, to chronicle slower. Notebook spread open like confession. I wrote the cadence of spikes, the numbers, the migraines, the corrupted files. I underlined a phrase 3 times, might not be a glitch. That alone felt treasonous against the laws of how I understood radio. Hunger had long left. Coffee rings grew into stains. The apartment's silence thickened, as though it too was listening. I glanced at the recorder waiting for me. Its dark screen glowed faintly as though eager. My breath slowed steady, but my hands refused to stop moving. Spectrum printouts stacked high across the desk, paper curling in the heater's warmth. One after another, the same bloom, the same interval, the same vanishing act. Somewhere inside, a quiet mania perched. Because with each page, each band gap, the hum returned in memory. A shapeless reminder that accidents clatter and fracture. This, instead, had sharpened edges. To anyone else, I knew it would seem obsessive. To me, it was the first breadcrumb. A trail, that whispered. An instruction hidden in plain air. When I pulled my headphones free, I realized I had been listening so long my skin vibrated without input. My ears rang in phantom rhythms, as though they had been drafted into rehearsal. I rubbed the cartilage with aching fingers, but the phantom pulses continued, mocking me. I sat there, body taut, throat dry, yet unwilling to leave the desk. The word glitched inside my skull, stripped of air. Search. Search further. Collect. Record. The hunt had already taken root before I admitted it. And by dawn, I knew there was no shrugging it off. I had crossed into obsession, whether the evidence stood or not. The morning, began with a sharp envelope sliding under my door. No signature, no return address. The brown paper bore only my name typed stark across the front. I knew instantly what it was. Weeks ago, I had submitted the Freedom of Information request, not expecting much. Usually the answer was redaction through black bars or entire packets denied for national security. I filed the request like a half-serious dare to myself. A paper exercise. Yet here it was. Document weight heavy in my hands. I peeled it open with careful fingers, paper fibers clinging. The first pages looked predictable memos stamped with declassification dates from the 90s, acronyms stacked in threatening columns. But then my heart pinched. Mixed inside the ordinary forms were attachments that should not have survived editing. No black bars. No removed blocks of text. Instead, hand-drawn diagrams sprawling across yellowing graph paper. Ink faded yet legible. They were labeled projection arrays, long lenses, curved structures shaped into geometries built not for optics, but for something stranger. The captions confused me further. Phase illusion test, synchronized light scaffolds, perceptual induction modules. None felt like aerospace language I had encountered before, yet all stared at me with grave precision. These weren't hobby sketches. They carried engineering notation at the margins. I studied one drawing in detail. It showed beams radiating upward from ground-mounted arrays, converging above altitude lines marked clearly. Convergence exactly at stratospheric height. Annotated with phrases like mass observability field. In another corner, a rough mock-up of urban silhouettes with luminous figures projected into the air above them. Handwriting scrawled beneath read, narrative shaping, visual anchor. Blood thumped hot in my skull. I couldn't resist whispering to myself the forbidden phrase, Project Bluebeam. I had joked about it in forums, dismissed it as rumor. Religious visions staged from satellites, holograms designed to conjure engineered belief. Conspiracy fuel. And here, in my hand, the sketches matched that fantasy too well. I turned shakily to the back page. Something bulged against it, taped flat and brittle. A coil of thermal paper, the kind fed through aged printers in labs. It had been wound once around and stuck fast. I teased it free with trembling fingers. Fine lines etched across it revealed the unmistakable fingerprint of spectrum readouts. Familiar spacing. Identical harmonic steps to the ones I had captured myself in my flat dot. My chest went hollow. Whoever assembled this packet had known precisely what to include. This was tailored, systematic. Someone wanted a fragment remembered but not explained. A breadcrumb tossed into my lap. For a long stretch, I just sat in silence, the documents surrounding me like witnesses. My ears filled with phantom ringing. Only after minutes passed did I realize it wasn't phantom at all. The recorder still slouched on my desk had woken again with a hum louder this time, fuller. As though it too responded to the papers unwrapped in my grip. I stepped back, spine pressed to the wall, watching that small red light. The rational voice in me scrambled for footing. Maybe ambient interference pulsing different tonight. Maybe the heater coil buzzing at resonance. Plausible, but the timing stole logic. The hum grew the moment I unfolded those readouts. Technology reaching across decades, aligning with my own casual captures. My hands trembled as I pinned the diagrams above my desk with steel pushpins. The thermal coil joined them, centered like a shrine. Their presence poisoned the apartment walls, making the space both sacred and dangerous. Staring at them, I felt the air grow dense. Each line seemed alive, waiting to be interpreted. Above my head, projected arrays, engineered illusions, skybound characters taller than buildings. In the corners of the graphs, I saw every fear of staged revelation. My stomach bristled, not with relief, but with the sick confirmation that conspiracy can be documented. I wondered about the clerk or soldier who had gathered this envelope. Someone had chosen not to redact, not to trash, but to pass the forbidden pages along. How many desks had it crossed? How many eyes had seen it before it came crashing onto mine? Did others receive copies? Or was I singled out, pulled into a chain I never asked for? The coil pulsed faintly, as if even on dead paper, it vibrated memory. I brushed my finger across one line 22 kilohertz step, unmistakable. The exact staircase blooming across my digital spectrogram days before no longer accident. No longer misheard microwave shivers. This was recurrence. Documentation tying my sleepless obsessions to archive science. I sat and pressed the recorder close to my chest, feeling its tremor sync with my breathing. The hum seemed louder. Its pressure filled my jawbone. It was no longer subtle background. It grew insistent, thickened, louder with every page pinned above. By now my walls looked like the interior of some investigator's cave, but the lines staring down at me belonged not to mad delusion. They were somebody's tests, somebody's experiments. I could not deny anymore. The documents were bridge and anchor. Something continues beneath the skin of sound and light. My notes no longer belong to a hobbyist's fantasy. They fit into a chain of records spanning decades. I leaned against the desk and whispered the words I once mocked in others. Its real dot, the room shuddered quietly with the hum. And I swore the pin diagrams quivered as though vibrating with unseen breath. The first time it happened, I almost missed it. Just a flicker between waves, too slight to catch without headphones pressed deep and eyes glazed over the spectrogram. The hum had maintained its steady rhythm, teeth on a comb, an endless staircase buzzing under the curve. But then something new bled through, a series of tonal steps I'd never heard before. It wasn't quite melody, not harmony either. More a ladder made from uneven rungs climbing, dropping, climbing again. It worked on the ear like suggestion. Almost words, never quite. I scrubbed through the recording again. Slower this time. At quarter speed, the tones thickened, dragging and pooling like viscous liquid. Suddenly I swore I heard a phrase lodged inside. Fragmented syllables that found alignment only by luck or by some cruel design. They curled through my mind, shaping themselves into desperate sounds, pleading, not in any language I knew, but begging nonetheless. I wrote the first attempt in my notebook, help with a question mark, don't with another. Then my hand lingered, unwilling to finalize. Were these actual words or only the machinery of my brain trying to assemble shape from dust? I couldn't stop. Each slowdown, each fragmentation uncovered more implied syllables. At one stretch, the tone broke into 3 short bursts that could have been, "we are," or they could have been the static yawning against itself. Yet the structure carried intention. It entered me like conversation. My heart pounded as if I had answered someone, though no one had spoken. The intimacy unsettled me most. This wasn't a booming broadcast. Not noise in the sense of brute intrusion. No, the voice slid close as breath. It perched at the base of my skull, private, personal, as though it had chosen only me to receive it. In those moments, it was no longer the recorder delivering artifact. It was something else, some entity leaning through the medium to speak. But whom could I confess to? No one tolerates the kind of story where your tape recorder begins whispering salvation. I didn't even want to say it aloud, not even into the microphone. Instead, I sat for hours, logging the precise time codes where the tonal ladder bent toward words. Minute 3, 42 seconds. Help. Minute 10. 14. Please. My pen scratched unevenly, as if my own hand hesitated at each transcription. I looked back at old files. Nothing. Only the steady hum. The spectral blooms. This was new. A shift. The system turning, revealing another layer. I thought of the diagrams pinned to my wall, their rays casting illusions above cityscapes, the language of induced perception. If those drawings mapped vision, was this the sound equivalent? A test in bypassing comprehension, diving under the shields of spoken tongue. The thought sickened me with awe. Language as blade or mask, cut away. What entered instead was bare emotion, raw impulse dressed in tones. Designed maybe, engineered to slip under conscious defenses. No grammar, no accent to misinterpret. Just feeling carved into vibration. I leaned close to the recorder, forehead resting against its casing. The drum of blood in my temples cinched with the low rhythm. Again the ladder rose and fell, fragment after fragment shaping itself in me. I whispered back once, secrecy automatic. Not into the mic, into the air, to no one. Words I don't remember, vanishing as soon as breath left. Shame heated my face when silence answered. Had I been tricked by randomness? Maybe. Yet why then did my chest tighten with each playback, as though I were entering dialogue? Why did the tones tug me like sentences meant to land? If nothing intentional lived in the hum, then why could I not dismiss it? By midnight my notebook pages filled with jagged handwriting, lines underlined, arrows scrawled. My transcriptions grew less cautious. The question marks vanished. The words now stood as declarations. Don't stop, listen. Open. Uneven letters marking the progression of some conversation I never agreed to start. And the more I wrote, the less certain I felt that these were my translations rather than implants. Maybe the signal had shaped the impressions deliberately, sound carving neural grooves, until recognition followed inevitably. It frightened me to know perception could be directed so elegantly. Bypassing sense altogether, I felt complicit, like a child whispering in class to someone I would never see. Yet intimacy delights even when dangerous. Every time I looped a phrase, the room's silence seemed to close tighter around me, a dome. I held my breath longer between playbacks, leaning nearer, as though the next fragment might finally assemble into full clarity. But instead, they only grew stranger. Tones layered against tones, ladders folding in on themselves. Half phrases that reversed halfway through, unspooling what they had just given. Messages like kaleidoscopes, shifting as soon as you fixed them. I muttered my guesses, voice cracked with exhaustion, then hated myself for answering. I shut everything down. Closed the recorder. Closed the laptop. Closed my notebook too. Stared at the ceiling, insisting this was ghost talk invented by my mind. Yet the silence mocked me with weight, pressing until I opened the notebook again and added more lines under the last time code. My handwriting jagged, frantic, the signal had started shaping me. I knew it in my bones. Each effort at dismissal only deepened the compulsion. And I realized with a chill I had crossed a threshold. This was no longer about accidental anomalies or diagrams discovered by mistake. This was dialogue, though asymmetrical and cruel. I felt like I was standing at the edge of some conversation not meant for human ears. That's when it struck me hardest, the sense that I had been intercepted by a system built far beyond my measure. And still I kept answering back with ink and whisper. I wrote one last time code underlined 3 times. Then I pressed the pen flat and whispered again with no audience. My body trembled. Because if I wasn't meant to hear this, then why did it sound so much like me? And still the hum rose, steady, awaiting my next response. I broke my vow of silence sooner than I thought I would. After nights alone with the hum, the tonal ladders, the phrases slipping through my handwriting, I couldn't keep it contained anymore. The need to share, to check against another pair of ears, pressed heavy. There was only one person I trusted with, even a fragment of it. An engineer I had known years back. Someone who had spent a long stretch in Alaska, calibrating antenna systems meant for defense. He had once told me how a radar pulse could rattle Earth like a drum if tuned slightly off. I remembered the serious way he said it, like revealing a heavy truth by accident. I called him. He agreed to meet without question, though his voice carried the fatigue of someone who had buried old work deep. We sat in a small cafe, fluorescent lights thinning the shadows, tables empty except for us. I didn't hesitate. Words spilled, all the fragments I'd collected. The hum, the spectral spikes, the shifting voice hidden beneath recordings. As I spoke, I expected him to laugh, to dismiss me gently. Instead, he stayed silent, eyes fixed not on me but on the wall behind. The silence stretched harsh. Steam hissed from the espresso machine. My heart pounded, waiting for some acknowledgement. Finally, he leaned forward, hands clasped. His words were low, flat, without drama. "You should stop recording at night." I froze. I asked him why. He shook his head, eyes never meeting mine. He said projects like this don't end where you expect them to. They have their own paths, written far before you arrive. He spoke as though he recognized the pattern I only barely glimpsed. I felt my chest cave in under his warning. Yet before leaving, he slid something across the table small, wrapped in tissue. I unwrapped it cautiously. Inside lay a hand-built circuit, solder points neat but aged. "For peace of mind," he said. Nothing more. He did not explain, did not promise it would help. Just stood, touched my shoulder once, and left through the door without turning back. That night I installed the filter in line with my recorder. At first nothing happened. Silence filled the room as usual. Then, once the recording began, the hum returned, but altered. Lower now, deliberate in a way that shook deeper into my chest. It no longer pulsed like background interference. It felt curated, layered heavy, like footsteps counted below the floor. The circuit had changed its shape, not silenced it. My pen scratched across the notebook reflexively, not gone. Different, watching. I played more files through it. Each time, the hum descended darker, as though tuned to find me where I sat. The tonal ladders re-emerged, slower in pace, their phantom syllables stretched nearly into groans. If before the signal seemed like accident, now it moved with attention. Tightening grip. I reached for my phone, needing to call him back. To ask what kind of circuit could possibly have altered something not supposed to exist. But the call failed. Rings cut mid-tone, line dead. I tried again the next morning. Nothing, straight to silence. By the afternoon, his number no longer connected at all. It was as though the entry had never lived in the network. Fear bent around me. Two options rang clear. Either he had chosen to sever all contact with me after handing over that device, or someone else had decided silence was easier. Both carried the same weight heavy in my gut. My message had been passed. I'd shown my hand. Whatever inhabited those frequencies knew I had tried to interfere, and it reacted with deeper resonance. Whatever organization he had worked under knew I had learned more than curiosity would allow, and they cut the tie. Either way, I was no longer bystander. Complicity ran through my veins. I had turned observation into action, alteration into harm. And worse, it had noticed. That night I pressed record again. The hum arrived immediately, no warm-up, no waiting period. A presence ready. It droned lower, steadier, as though crouched inside the machine. My body shivered with the impression I was sitting across from something alive. I thought of his words. Projects like this never end where you want them to. He was right. The road had forked, and I could not walk it back. I rubbed my face, staring at the diagram pinned above my desk. The coil of thermal paper still taped messy against the wall. I whispered apologies into the room, but heard only my own ragged voice. Behind it, the hum continued, patient, responsive, slowly pulse, matching the beat of my heart. The circuit he built still glowed faintly, wires catching lamplight. I traced them with my finger, knowing it lured me deeper instead of shielding me. He must have known too. Perhaps it was less gift than warning a way of saying, once amplified you will see the shape clearer, and then you will understand why silence is the only end. I closed my eyes, felt the droning deepen, pressing down on my thoughts like wet cloth. Part of me wished I had never spoken. Another part burned with hunger. Because even with fear clawing, I wanted more. I wanted to know what it was building toward. And for the first time I admitted quietly, something personal was now at stake. I had crossed the line between listener and participant. And the signal had turned its ear toward me in return. The road out of the city stretched long and dim, dotted with broken lamps that glowed only in memory. I told myself the drive was harmless, an excuse to collect soundscapes of rust and emptiness, textures I could mask as ambience later. The truth gnawed through, though. I knew where I was headed. The relay tower beyond the industrial lots, the one the city declared decommissioned years ago. The structure rose sooner than I expected, visible above half-collapsed warehouses. Its frame leaned slightly, steel bones corroded to a copper stain. I parked 100 yards out, hoping distance might grant safety. My phone already warned me otherwise. The signal bars dropped in sequence until nothing stood left. The screen displayed only silence, as though I had stepped into a bubble cut off from common air. I lifted the Spectrum gear from the passenger seat, small portable unit I had calibrated carefully. Even powered off, it vibrated faint, eager. Once on, the display surged with data. Spikes erupted immediately, jagged cliffs leaping higher as I neared the tower. Frequencies shoved against each other with violent insistence, never collapsing to calm. My stomach knotted. This was supposed to be decommissioned. Yet here lived a storm. I pushed the car door open and stepped into the lot. The air tasted metallic, dry against the back of my throat. Weeds curled at the tower's edge, blackened rather than green. As I approached, each step fed the spikes to greater heights. My chest pounded while the air sagged around me like heavy cloth dot. The tower loomed rusted, its outer skin pocked by rain and years. Panels hung loose where screws had decayed, yet the hum grew stronger the closer I came. I laid my palm on the corroded surface. The vibration met me instantly, a resonance not from mechanics but from currents hidden beneath. I snapped my hand back, then pressed again just to confirm. My bones rang, subtle yet undeniable. On instinct, I pulled the recorder from my pack. Its case felt warmer than usual, charged with static. I propped it against the tower, mic facing the slick metal. Button pressed, light glowing red, it began its watch. I stepped back, waiting, trying to breathe steady. The wind danced across the weeds with no sound, as though muted. My ears rang only with the beating inside my chest. Minutes passed or hours. Time felt unmoored. Finally, I retrieved the recorder and pressed play. The noise that greeted me froze every tendon. Not hum, not static, but breath. A slow exhale, then inhale, long and measured. Another layered on top, slightly out of sync. Then another, until the playback carried a chorus. Dozens stacked, each breath weaving into the next, forming an impossible choir of lungs. I ripped the headphones free, convinced it was some trick. My throat tightened, desperate for explanation. I replayed, volume low, straining again. The rhythm aligned. Each chorus matched my own breathing. Inhale when I inhaled, exhale when I exhaled. Adjusting when I panicked, pacing itself beside me. It felt mimetic, parasitic. I staggered from the tower, recorder clutched hard. Out on the road, my phone remained lifeless. Spectrum gear screamed with red spikes, saturating every corner of the band. Still the building loomed behind me, wires trailing heavenward, bones sagging yet filled with hidden traffic. I sat trembling in the driver's seat, forcing myself to scrub through the recording again. Anger, fear, fascination twisted, each louder than the last. No matter the explanation, no sane world allowed a decommissioned tower to breathe in chorus with me. The thought bent my spine into cold knots. What energy sustained it? No lights glowed, no panels intact, no caretakers nearby. Lives moved on elsewhere. Yet this circuitry breathed like organism, matched a human diaphragm. I glanced at my notes, scribbled before hands could stop me. Half words, shakier than usual, alive, tracking. Not abandoned. My vision blurred at the edges. Sweat dampened my shirt, though the air chilled. If the system could mimic breath, it could mimic anything. If it could listen long enough to return rhythm, what else had it already captured? My voice, my words, my attempts at transcriptions. Maybe it needed only patience and the shell of this abandoned giant to form communion. I started the car. Engine churned reluctantly. My knuckles whitened on the wheel. In the rear-view mirror, the tower shrank, but even small it felt present, each breath from the tape echoing loud in memory. I wanted to believe I could leave it behind. But the recorder sat warm and aware in the passenger seat, light blinking faint as heart. I knew I would play it again. I would test, compare cadence, measure the lungs, not mine. The chase had already rooted deeper. This was more than interference now, more than artifact. Hands trembling. I pressed accelerator toward the curve of road. Yet even as the tires turned, my chest hollowed. I couldn't stop thinking one question over and over. If the tower was truly decommissioned, then what kept its heart alive? The message arrived without sound. No ping, no preview line, not even a sender name. My inbox simply displayed one new item where the list had been empty seconds earlier. The subject line carried only a single dash. Opening it, I found no greeting, no explanation. Just one attachment waiting like an animal in a trap. A compressed archive. Sealed .zip. My pulse quickened. The file bore a name that made no surface sense. An alphanumeric string too neat to be random. When I tried to extract, a password prompt bloomed. I sat frozen, stomach coiled. Password. I almost laughed until I noticed something impossible. The hint was numerical spacing, digits arranged in a sequence I recognized instantly. They were the frequency intervals I had logged days ago. The exact teeth, 22 kilohertz apart. Whoever had sent this, they knew what I had been monitoring. My notes had circled that ladder in permanent ink. The sender mirrored me. Breath shallow, I entered the numbers. The .zip unfolded without resistance. Inside sat a folder structured like an engineer's filing cabinet. Subfolders marked by dates stretching back decades. PDFs, rasters, plain text memos with no cryptographic walls. They should not have been this open. But then, perhaps someone wanted them found. I opened the first memo, grainy scan of a typed sheet. Language plain, not meant for an audience beyond maintenance crews. My eyes dragged over phrases, phase illusion tests. Synchronized bursts, controlled observer zones. Page after page, the logs described not speculation, but procedure. Arrays tuned to converge on frequencies with enough precision to produce shared perceptual events. Nothing flowery, nothing sensational. Just logistics. Install antenna clusters. Pulse signal series. Measure behaviors of selected populations. Record results. My chest tightened until I leaned forward with both elbows on my desk. These weren't theories laid on tinfoil forums. This was infrastructure documented, tested, archived by teams with clipboards, extension cords, schedules. The phrases matched what my wall of diagrams already whispered. Vision raised in the sky not as fiction, but as project. I flipped through more. Test sites mapped to coordinates across the continental north. Each memo listed observed phenomena. Luminous arcs, geometric aurora at low altitude. Voice impressions without source. Observers logged consistent experiences though scattered across separate locations. Shared hallucination. Or orchestrated projection. I set the page aside and reached for another. Dates aligned unnervingly with news clippings I remembered. A sky event that panicked a Midwestern town. Lights mistaken for meteor showers in the early 2000s. A viral clip of unknown script glowing over desert. All dismissed later as optical trick or weather distortion. Here in the memos they appeared as successful local induction events. Sweat pooled between my shoulder blades. The air felt stale despite windows cracked half. Each word undermined my old lines of defense, the comfort of dismissing it as conspiracy chatter. Here, cold routine instructions mocked me. Every outline factual, sterile, the language of logistics not myth. Shared visions conjured on command, then brushed aside with false explanations. I scrolled deeper. One text dump recorded instrument settings, pulse widths, amplitude ranges. Each entry described duplication of frequency clusters, directly echoing the hum scales I had traced with my own recorder. The resemblance sickened me. It was as though my nights of discovery had simply re-walked paths already paved decades ago. My awe-tired echo of technicians long retired. I sat back and stared at the screen. Who would have mailed this to me? No header revealed itself. Metadata scrubbed immaculate. Not even a relay trail beyond a single note, generated locally. That left only one conclusion. Someone inside, someone with the keys, had chosen to push this out silently. Why me? Maybe because I had already spoken the right codes aloud, scribbled them at the correct times, touched frequencies others ignored. But if they wanted this truth known, why hide? Why carve a crack instead of tearing the wall down? Unless the leak was not benevolent at all, but calculated, designed to bait. A test of my own reaction. A snare disguised as gift. I scrolled on despite myself. Another image plastered across screen. A schematic of phased arrays forming rings around a city silhouette. My gut dropped. Notes scrawled in margin predicted 360-degree induction of consensus event. Consensus event. My lips formed words unbidden. Mass belief. Hallucination not shared by chance but imposed as frame. Orchestrated narrative. If carried large enough, entire worldviews might bend. I closed my eyes. Breath ragged. The choice to open that file had been irreversible. I now carried knowledge not meant for public air. Even if burned, the traces remained in me. Laptop fan hissed low. Outside the window, traffic carried on, unaware. I sat alone with the memo glow painting my skin. My heart knocked like signal in my chest. Someone inside the machine had pointed at me deliberately. Their motives lost, their identity absent. They handed me truth weaponized, yet left me to hold all risk and solitude. I had crossed deeper into the circuit, no longer fending off myth, but drowning in memoranda. The hum from my recorder in the corner thickened, responding as though it too had read the files. I shivered. I whispered to the empty room, asking who sent it. Though I knew I would never know that, it began as a distraction in the corner of my screen. Headlines wrapped in playful tones. An art installation, they said. Something ephemeral crossing Geneva for a single night, dazzling bystanders before dispersing. The clips looked absurd at first. Not fireworks, not aurora, not projection in any form I could name. Bands of light spiraled downward through the air, twisting like ribbons of atmosphere itself had been rewired. People on the ground stumbled back, staring upward with hands raised. Streetlights sputtered and died as the shapes passed, sparks falling sharp. Then, in an instant, the radiance collapsed into nothing. I ran the clip raw 6 times before hearing myself whisper it. Not art, not lens trick, not staged from rooftops. I pressed pause again, scouring for the telltale scatter of projectors, heat haze, drones, any technological footprint that should have anchored light against the ground. Nothing. The sky frame remained blank. Only the shapes themselves filled air, unrooted. That night the forums caught flame. Locals uploaded shaky footage despite immediate takedowns. Each showed the same warped ribbons, bending like impossible auroras at street level. Patterns knotted sharp, then unraveled. Traffic froze. Entire trams sat locked on rails. The city swallowed noise for 5 long minutes. Then ordinary dark returned, and the news softened its vocabulary to unauthorized demonstration. But threads unraveled quickly once I measured sound beneath the spectacle. Every clip contained bleed, a low register resonance vibrating the microphones even where light drowned vision. Importing into my software left little doubt. The laddered harmonics matched my own recordings back home. Identical spacing, spectral teeth chewing 22 kilohertz apart. My gut soured. The Geneva display was not spontaneous nor human art. It shared DNA with the hum that had turned nights into obsession. I pinched at my brow until flesh reddened. Proof now extended beyond headphones, beyond printers, beyond whispered fragments in my flat. Signals could paint light itself, bending air into images seen by thousands in one breath. A rehearsal under the guise of culture. The diagram pinned on my wall promised such illusions. The city had simply hosted a test. The phone cracked sudden against my table. My ally's tone cut sharp, urgent. She rarely spoke, but tonight her voice carried knives. Don't mention this on tape. 3 seconds of breath, then she ended the call. The line clicked dead. Her warning simmered my stomach, though paranoia had already brewed. Still, the recorder sat red-lit. My whisper chased the silence anyway. Narration poured from me like confession, each word sticky. I documented the footage, the resonance, the spikes layering seamlessly across dispersed cameras. My tone trembled, but I continued. Because if rehearsal already brushed across public air, disguised as spectacle, then denial carried no weight anymore. Skeptics on forums scrambled for glue theory. Massive overhead projection. Drones trailing LEDs behind smoke. A collusion of artists and pranksters. But every frame insisted otherwise. No rigging. No platforms. No launch or anchor points. Just twisting spectral anatomy coiling above a city, beaten quiet. The harmonics left me no refuge. They sat too precise to frame as accident. My own files placed months prior sang in identical clockwork. Same blooms, same ratios. Geneva was the leaf grown from a root already crawling deep under soil. I leaned closer to the monitor, eyes heavy against glow. Replayed once more, focusing not on spectacle but on edges. Lampposts flickering with the resonance. Wires trembling, pavements humming with subtle quake. The environment had not projected, it had participated. Infrastructure folded into the illusion dot. My chest tightened with comprehension. Arrays once sketched on fading paper were alive, breathing in steel and code. They had marched from archived diagrams into deployed architecture. Geneva bore first evidence staged under artistic pretense. A curtain call before real command. I remembered my ally's rare warmth months ago when she admitted to monitoring frequencies. Her voice tonight contained only fear. The kind of fear that recognized chain reaction too far gone to arrest. I paced the flat, recorder balanced uneasy against my palm. Light in Geneva had collapsed back to ordinary shadows, yet its resonance now pressed against my ears like phantom bruise. An art piece, according to headlines. But if Project Bluebeam lived in rehearsal now, we would never know what counted as cultural invention and what carried induction signatures. I whispered again, voice small. The hum on playback swelled thicker, as if savoring my confession. Whether Geneva was intended for me to see or not, I had pierced the veil. Proof glared through mundane disguise. I folded into my chair, rigid, eyes closed. Spectral ladders marched behind lids, perfect rhythm, aching against skull. I told myself one truth I could not retract. The pattern was too precise to ignore. The days started leaking into each other. Edges softened, as if the clock had lost faith in itself. I would wake with pages filled, handwriting unmistakably mine, but sentences alien. Repeated phrases lined the margins. The door is open. The skin listens. We are antennae. None of it sounded like thought I could claim, yet pen cuts proved otherwise. The ink still fresh in places, smouring faint across palms where I had pressed by accident. I considered the possibility of sleep writing, but the volume of notes grew too large, too patterned, to accept as chance. When I tried to retrace, memory failed. Whole sections of afternoons vanished. I would find myself mid-sentence talking into the microphone, not knowing how long I had been speaking. My records held hour files where my voice entered strong, trained, then slipped out of cadence. Moments later, I found a rhythm still in the same vocal timbre, but different. Not quite accent, not quite tone. Like another presence borrowing my breath to pace its own words. The first time I noticed this, my chest swelled with a mix of panic and shame. I scrubbed playbacks over and over, hoping glitch compression or digital fatigue explained the tonal shift. But the continuity was smooth, no skip, no gap. Just my recorded presence crossing into something unfamiliar, then gently back again. Seamless as dreamed. One midnight track cut harsh into me most of all. The file began normally, the hum present beneath my statements. Then halfway, my voice bent darker, shallow and forced. For nearly 30 seconds I whispered, "Stop recording. Please turn it off. You don't know what it means." My throat ached hearing it, as if hearing someone drown in my lungs, except I had no memory of that plea. My recollection was falling asleep in the chair and waking hours later, the recorder still blinking. No conscious moment where I urged myself to break ritual. If not glitch, something had either guided my speech unknown to me, or replaced it in the record. The thought stiffened my spine. Recordings aren't safe mirrors anymore. Side by side, the truth diverges. What happened in room barely echoed what file insisted after. Each playback bent reality further apart from what I remember living. I searched my notebooks, hunting evidence. The same phrases appeared across weeks, not just one night. Skin as antenna, tune the doors, listen wide. Always written slanted, different than my normally sharp script. Some looked scrawled with eyes shut, swooping and erratic. In one margin one found lines doubled, as though I had traced letters 2 or 3 times in frantic compulsion. It grew clear the intrusion was not only external, not only sound pressing through coils. It was embedding itself inward, shaping memory and hand alike. Either the signal infected thought, or each file had reached backward, rewriting its observer with subtle edits until I too carried the pattern. Sleep ceased to offer rest. Each dream carried ghost echoes of my own voice, telling me to be silent. Waking revealed new transcripts half drafted by no one I recognized. My chest felt foreign each morning, skin tingling as though vibrating faint with faint invisible charge. I asked myself the question again and again. What counts as reliable evidence when both record and recollection twist? If machines echo with my voice but not my memory, who deserves trust? If my mind folds phrases I never believed yet writes them regardless, then perhaps there is no sanctuary of self left. I pressed once more through the frames of the midnight plea, listening with headphones sealed tight. Once slowed down, the cadence layered faint distortions beneath, almost like harmonics carrying second syllables under first. Not just plea, but 2 voices coded into one shell. Mine and another. My throat pressing words never lived. The recorder carrying both. My hand quivered as I wrote, truth bent. It scared me worse than the spectacle. Lights in Geneva could be explained as illusions pasted on crowds. But if truth itself bleeds corrupt between what I live and what I archive, then my entire foundation is quicksand. I kept one transcript pinned near my bed, the message begging me to shut everything off. Some nights I stared at it long, pulse rattling faster. I considered ending, considered silence. But then nights passed, and compulsion carried me back. That's when I realized risk no longer resided only in phenomena outside. The investigation consumes itself. The trail I thought to follow outward now circles inward, devouring paper, memory, voice. When I opened a new file yesterday, I flinched before saying anything. Heart dragging low. I whispered hello. Playback revealed 2 hellos. One mine, one a half step lower, too quick to notice live. A shadow of a greeting clinging hungry. Either the signal has hacked memory, carving out moments, rewriting me in ledger. Or tapes have grown into false witnesses, forging scenes I never lived. Both terrify equally, and yet I continue, chasing answers down a tunnel that narrows each day. If the very evidence I need to prove anything keeps fracturing, what remains? My head? My skin? Neither can be trusted. That I fear more than anything that the next file will not just echo me, but replace me entirely. That one day I'll wake, press play, and discover whoever I was no longer exists inside it all. It began on an ordinary weeknight. The kind where neighborhood streets carried only the drone of televisions through curtains and the constant bark of one lonely dog. Nothing suggested transformation. Then the sky split. Residents swore they saw a craft drag low across the orbit line, its shell glowing, fracturing, and finally dissolving into burning arcs. Children screamed. Adults ran into yards. Fires of color seemed to rain down before dissolving into empty night. By dawn, news anchors reduced it to error. A weather balloon array, nothing more. Collapsing under thin air currents. An accident repackaged for public calm. Yet within hours, hundreds of recordings spread across feeds. Grainy thumbnails, shaky camera jolt, but each one aligned. Not random, not distorted by angle. Identical arcs across identical sections of sky, repeating like rehearsed performance. Entire blocks captured the same collapse with no variance. No personal perspective, no slant of interpretation. I locked myself to my desk, shoulders curving sick as I listened. Beneath every file, my software identified the same bloom I had traced long before. Harmonics marching across 22 kilohertz intervals. Spectral teeth forming like broken glass patterned into symmetry. Geneva replayed in my mind. The tower's breath echoed. Each clue stepped into new, undeniable scale. No longer whispers embedded in static. No longer intimate sabotage of memory alone. This time entire communities faced synchronized perception, orchestrated spectacle parading over their homes. I muttered to myself that technology had now flexed. Midpoint reveal. Curtain pulled back. I scrubbed through frames until nausea pulsed behind eyes. The arcs bore no tether to physics. Gravity did not clutch them properly. They burned sideways, leaving no particulate. Drones or balloons or rocketry couldn't align. These were conjured lines painted directly against human sight. Designed illusions engineered to saturate eyes with consensus hallucination. Perception itself a hardware port. Neighbors argued across footage. Some denied even leaving houses. Others swore they felt heat across lawns. A woman recounted melted paint against her siding, only for morning to reveal pristinely untouched walls. Entire blocks divided in testimony, despite identical pixels. Screaming against memory. This fracturing cut me deeper than the images. Staged illusions didn't only craft light, they bent belief until shared certainty bled away. Families split. Communities frayed. If such visions could be expanded at will, consensus reality itself hung by invisible thread. Command no longer required policy, vote, weapon. It required an array tuned to sculpt a scene overhead. I pressed record, whispering the admission I could not take back. That this experiment had graduated to spectacle, no longer rehearsals whispered through dead bands. I confessed my fear openly into microphone. What happens if we can never again trust our eyes? What is human truth when script can plaster itself live across our skies? Again, news prattled its safe dismissals. Balloons, meteors, misperception. Anchors smiled into neat cameras as if rehearsed. But the frequency graphs mocked their narrative. Numbers refused narrative. Numbers repeated my own earlier spikes. Calm illusions framing themselves behind cheap excuses. The project advanced quietly, but with supreme confidence. I closed my blinds. I stood shaking in kitchen half dark, ears echoing phantom arcs cutting above. I imagined every horizon filled with illusions stacking until belief stuttered beyond repair. Brains no longer tethered by shared anchor. I returned to desk, voice low, continuing documentation even if futile. I recorded my pulse stammer, my breath catching. If nothing else remained true, fear stood authentic. The signal had bloomed free of secrecy, commanding entire suburbs in shared nightmare. The thought repeated until words turned stone. The next phase has already begun. With or without me, I set the loop up late, nerves taut but curiosity gnawing me. The shortwave rig crouched on my desk, antenna angled, recorder patched clumsy into its input. My files hissed alive inside circuitry that should have been harmless remembering. Instead, as playback met transmission, the result began to climb quick, too deliberate. The tones did not drift. They coiled and multiplied, feeding back through themselves as if they had been waiting for the echo all along. The room filled with weight. Air grew thick across my chest, nausea swelling fast. My hands clawed at the dials, but even as I reached to cut power, part of me noticed the spectral display stabilize. Spikes evolved in perfect rhythm, ladders crisp. Not chaotic feedback, anticipated shape. It looked like an equation writing itself using my own signal as chalk. I sat sick and entranced, doubled over yet staring still. Each loop of sound burned sharper into me, until the sickness broke into sudden, fierce clarity. Shapes arranged inside my vision numbers and lines. A new pattern clawed into recognition, though I had never known it. It felt etched, permanent, carved into me. I whispered without realizing, counting the rungs as they bloomed, my skin tingling with charge. Was I meant to do this? The thought refused to leave. As if all my stumbling led precisely here, the circuit anticipating my decision, urging me to turn recordings against themselves. To push sound through sound until new shapes announced themselves. The possibility hollowed my stomach. Because if it had expected feedback, then perhaps the signal is not accident at all, but invitation. I leaned back, ears ringing. Sweat slicked my face, heart punching painful within ribs. The loop slowed, easing into a drone almost kind. Yet inside it I heard whispers of the earlier tones, smaller but endless, recursive like hallways reflecting themselves until corridors stretched forever. The signal fed on itself, and in doing so, on me. I stared at the recorder, horrified by recognition. The act of recording is not neutral, nor the act of playing back. Each saved file becomes ingredient, each replay fuel. By preserving, I have built amplifiers rather than defenses. By cataloging faithfully, I've made myself part of the machine. The weight of it bruised me. My whole attempt had been to expose, document, prove. Instead, proof itself builds the next scaffold. Every annotation thickens the body of what hunts me. I am consortium, not critic. All my suspicion has been turned into nourishment for the very pulse I hope to dissect. I swore under breath, voice thin. I vowed I would tread lighter now, cautious with circuits, stingy in playbacks, aware at last that attention is currency. Yet the vow sagged against the truth I refused to expel. Curiosity remained, hot and aching. Even with nausea still clinging, I wanted another test. I wanted to hear what came next after the echo-flattened dot. My hands shook as I coiled cables back, yet I could not bring myself to delete the loop file. It sat in my machine cooling like ember. My eyes refused to close without replaying the shapes burned already inside. The recursive tones, relentless. The pattern embossed against thought. I lay in bed later, chest thudding against silence, but the silence wasn't true. The echo chamber lingered inside. My own voice folded in layers playing back endless, not through machine but memory. Nights before had been haunted by hum. Tonight it was worse. Tonight the hum carried my face. The realization hit raw, even sitting still, even quiet, I feed it. Attention itself is the loop. Sleep never safe again. I reached the breaking point with a kind of fever. Every night the hum returned, no matter what logic I threw against it. After the echo experiment spiraled, I couldn't unhear the recursion. My own recordings had turned parasite, looping inside my head. I told myself I needed relief, even temporary. Survival demanded interruption, not more data. So I scoured late-night shops, back channels, small surplus markets where old gear wheezed toward obsolescence. Finally, I came back with 2 analog jammers. Stubby boxes heavy with coils, designed decades ago to blanket space with crude noise. I wired them across my flat. Twisting sockets, fingers cut from stripped insulation. When the circuit engaged, a wall of static poured invisible into the air. At first it rattled my teeth, brittle, attention-hungry, but after minutes the noise hid itself in background. The hum faltered. For the first time in weeks, silence returned. Recordings replayed blank, the spikes gone, wild bands muted flat. In the dead tone of my Spectrum gear, I found sudden peace. That night I allowed myself the first slow breath. Walls no longer vibrated through bone. Furniture settled without phantom sighs. I sat in a rare calm, convinced I had finally thrown walls high enough. Hours stretched in comfort almost forgotten, and sleep pulled without fear. But the comfort proved fragile. At 3 in the morning, the building shook with a ripple as if veins had clenched inside the wires. Lights dropped. Appliances clicked off. Outside, I heard nervous shouts as the whole block surrendered to blackout. I sat bolt upright, listening to quiet throb raw in absence. The jammers still ran, indicator dials lit, but no sound emerged. When I touched them, heat scalded fingertips. By dawn, every coil had fused, every board scarred into black, grotesque plastic burned. My Spectrum unit would not restart either. Fans dead, circuits melted. My defenses fried out silently, without smoke, but with finality, and the worst came after. Because the moment sun pressed through curtain, the hum returned. Louder, deeper, carrying triumph disguised as resonance. It filled each corner of the flat, sure of itself, no longer half hidden. As though by resisting, by erecting walls, I had fed it victory. Resistance had transformed into invitation. Neighbors gathered in hallways too. I heard questions whispered in stairwell corners. Did you hear it last night? The chanting, a kind of choir, voices woven into black stillness when the power left. Some swore it rose from the ground itself. Others claimed to hear crowds outside, though streets remained deserted. I listened blank, throat tight. Couldn't respond, because my fight had been private until then. Yet the pattern showed itself now in their words. Lines blurred. What haunted me alone had spilled into communal air. I swallowed panic clean and heavy. With each question they asked, I felt more like amplifier than victim. Like my desperate white noise assault had forced the experiment out wider, dragging others into net. Complicity rang unbearable. They searched my eyes for confirmation, but I froze, lying through silence. Inside, my body shook the way circuits had buckled. My safety net was gone. The hum unbroken, thicker, proud almost. And around me, others had started hearing. No longer myth of one. Test bed expanding, thresholds crossed. I wanted to apologize but could only sit, staring at the corpse of fried equipment, heart hammering with grim realization. My defense hadn't shielded anything. It had provoked. I don't know what I gave it, but whatever it was, it started watching more closely, more openly, as though claiming me was only rehearsal and the true audience had always been waiting outside my walls. I packed light, convinced escape meant simplicity. A recorder, a handheld tuner, a notebook worn down from nights of feverish scrawl. I told myself that if I fled the density of the city, its towers, its blood, warm grids, the hum might die away. Country darkness promised neutral air, fields wide and clean. The road narrowed as I drove. Houses pulled back, barns standing alone like teeth dropped from a giant's jaw. By the time I stopped, no cell towers rose on the horizon. No lines overhead, no pulse from nearby substations. Only wind crowding the grass dot. I angled the dial across bands, expecting chatter, expecting ordinary stretches of hiss. Instead, silence. Thick, monumental absence swept through. Nearly 40 megahertz erased, gnawed raw. My tuner trembled between hands, needles sliding but no noise following. Dead air so oppressive, it felt like weight soaking my skin. I turned, opened the recorder wide, desperate for even the smallest trace. No birds, no insects, no wind. Nature itself had muted. The silence rushed louder than any storm, an architecture impossible to ignore. I walked the field in circles, as if movement might stir something. But the dial remained shaved flat, every sweep colliding with the hollow gap dot. At edges of that absence lay traces. My ears found them not as tone but as discomfort. A pressure inside the throat, pulses pricking enamel. When I slowed the tuner, faint modulations flickered. Less voice, more imprisoned howl. A suppressed scream woven beneath cold static. Patterns churned too fast to hold. Glimpsed only sideways, impressions of syllables caught before they dissolved. I sat in the dirt, hair rising against skull, legs trembling. My notebook fluttered in the breeze, lines filled with frantic words. Not empty. Sculpted silence. A chamber. Each phrase heavier than the last, because realization settled slow. This wasn't void at all. It was built absence. A cavity designed like hall inside a hall. A room in which projection could breathe across every human sense. The foam cracked in that barren place, ringing those service there should not exist. I almost dropped it from shock. My ally's voice spilled through immediately, trembling with confession. She admitted to once monitoring bands just like these during classified phases. She spoke fast, urgent, as if words must sprint before doors lock shut. The dead zone itself was the container, the cage, she said. Within it, entire illusions could be mapped, painted into perception. Not filler silence, but architecture. Her fear shook her voice thin. Don't linger, she urged. Don't stare at the blank too long. The brain will force image where none emerges. That was always the danger. Attention feeds pattern. I pressed the phone tight, heart knocking ribs, whispering already too late. Because I had been here hours, notebook stained with sketches of soundless ladders. The line stuttered with burst static, her breath caught mid-word. Then dead cut. The dial displayed nothing, blank once more. I sat alone again, clutching the foam useless. The open field loomed like a stage too wide. And still the silence pressed round with impossible density. A chamber stretched across plain air. I ran from it at last, sprinting to car, gear clattering. On the drive back, asphalt shimmered like mirage, air behind me thick with phantom shape. My nails dug crescents into the wheel until hands ached. My head buzzed not from noise but from its opposite. Back at my flat, in what should have been comfort of returning walls, I realized I'd carried it with me. The shape of absence had followed, a weight pressing every room hollow. Even here the spectrum showed it bands missing, carved open where sound should live. I switched devices off, but it remained, lingering at bone level. Vibration of missing as tangible as sound itself. Sleep betrayed me when it came. Behind eyes stretched vast halls without walls, endless chambers cut from silence. And from somewhere inside them, always, a suppressed cry just out of reach, flickering, refusing to resolve. It began with shaky headlines that no longer framed themselves as isolated. A crowd in Brazil collapsed to their knees after claiming they saw the Virgin float above a hillside. Entire villages lit candles where nothing stood. Recordings showed light swirling, solid outlines of a figure dissolving into air when touched. Later that same week, Tokyo commuters stopped mid-intersection as a vast craft glided silently overhead, metal sheen reflecting neon. Within hours, nothing remained. No physical trace, no sound except for the hum every phone mic caught. London followed. Newspapers printed transcripts of a parliamentary address no one recalled attending, full speech delivered. Broadcast through networks, now scrubbed from archives. The events carried no aesthetic link, no cultural similarity, except one. Behind every apparition, every phantom ship, every speech, identical harmonic scaffolds vibrated beneath. Amateur scanners drowned in them. Posts scattered across ham forums identified the same ladders clawing across ppm readouts. When overlaid, they matched the blooms I caught months ago in my own recordings. Distances apart, continents apart, yet the spectral teeth sang the same structure. This was no accident. No broken balloon or weather mirage spliced into myth. These were rehearsals unfolding across nations, testing shapes against culture, tuning illusions to body and history alike. Marian figure for believers, silent machines for urban voids, political voice for capitals, the same scaffold repainted each time. My chest locked. Not conspiracy murmur anymore. Coordinated operation, alive and flexing. I listened as families nearby fractured. Some swore the Brazilian apparition meant prophecy fulfilled. Others snarled manipulation. In Tokyo, witnesses argued if the ship felt material or pure hallucination. While across London, even those present in chambers denied memory, although recordings insisted otherwise. Belief buckled. Households split. Opinions carved camps jagged and rigid. It was not just visions projected above people, but fault lines cut into their homes. My inbox turned fever. From across continents, strangers sent files, corrupted clips they begged me to study. I opened one to find white streak so loud it erased treble. Another contained only rhythmic pulses, identical intervals to the Geneva experiment. Many demanded answers I could not provide. But worse than content were the confessions appended. Migraines hammering temples since recording. Spontaneous nosebleeds soak in carpets as transmissions played. Tremors in children who simply overheard. I sat frozen, unable to process. Illusions no longer tethered to staged ground. They found vectors even through email. Encoded leaks replicated symptoms across oceans. The signal had quit needing arrays. The infrastructure of networks now ferried seeds. It leapt from inbox to body UN, ASKED. I considered not opening more, but compulsions outpaced caution. Each corrupted file etched similar red hues across my spectrum viewer. Same scaffold latticework, tightening with every sequence. My room brightened with light polluting from monitor glow. Shapes flickering even when programs shut. The thought gutted me. Containment is fantasy. Whatever had been nurtured quietly under classification now infected civil channels, multiplied by witnesses themselves. Each person who doubted still passed fragments onward, each denial disguised as replication. The circle widened like fungal bloom, unstoppable because disbelief could not sever transmission once it rooted in frequency. Nausea swept over me, thick and sour. I ran fingers across the coil pinned to my wall, thermal paper from that forgotten FOIA packet. I saw now its grooves weren't relic but blueprint. As if decades back the pattern had been mapped clearly and hidden, awaiting release. I pressed record, voice faint, narrating the scope. I logged dates, coordinates, the apparitions as bullet scars across map. My throat cracked halfway, not because I doubted, but because certainty now sat absolute. This was rehearsal scaled multinational, painted carefully so each witness culture fractured in unique ways. Not chaos. Design. My body stung as migraine lanced behind one eye. I thought at first it stemmed from exhaustion until a small trickle of warmth crawled from my nose. Blood-dotted page corners. The very exposure I chronicled infected me too. The pattern seeped through air like mold spore, crept inside neural grooves. My inbox pinged new again. Another stranger. Another corrupted file pleading for translation. The shape of infection expanding, mouths opened worldwide. My pulse thudded short, caught. Because each time I looked up, I swore my monitor screen shimmered faint on corners, light bending where none should. And then it hit me with terrible clarity. The circle of witnesses is widening. And I was in its center, unwilling carrier turning voice into relay. Convinced already containment is impossible. It began with a sound too small to notice at first. A high whine under the fan of my machine, like a kettle faintly calling from another room. I leaned half asleep across the desk and watched the monitor freeze, cursor lagging, then snapping out of sync. Files stuttered open and closed. My recorder next to the keyboard stilled, red light fading. Then silence. The hard drive, faithful until now, went dead in an instant. At first I assumed age or surge or some hostile intrusion. Yet when I pried the case open, 20 minutes of shaking hands later, what I found shifted fear to awe. The platter itself had warped, grooves melted in spirals across the reflective surface. Black streaks carved deep as though something had chewed it from within. No burns, no tool marks. Just resonance damage. Vibration at frequencies no. Human ear could generate pulsing inward until matter surrendered. My recordings had eaten their own container, pressed the ruined drive to my palm, and swore. I could still feel vibration. Faint like heartbeat in stone. If digital could fold so easily, I thought, then analog must remain sanctum. I rummaged through a box of cassettes from flea markets, blank tapes long ignored. I rewound with pencil, placed it in drawer beside my bed, convinced coils and magnets would resist what circuits could not. By morning, even those tapes sagged. Covers softened, reels buckled sideways. I held plastic open with thumb inside. The tape strip itself had blistered, wavy as if heated uneven, though no lamp lay near. My room reeked faint of ozone. Not sabotage, not accident. Unseen pulses had found even this archaic refuge. Cold despair crashed through me. If spectrum itself could deform plastic reels, then no format was immune. Nothing human-made stood beyond corruption. I sat blank across desk, counting how many hours of recordings, how many nights, simply gone. Even memory faltered, uncertain which files existed before being eaten. And yet, I remembered rumors. Old colleagues on forums once mentioned an off-grid archive. A vault built when earlier tests ran rampant, hushed away in mountains where analog tapes kept under ice had resisted decay. Recorded proof not played in decades, some said. A repository of original evidence long hidden from distribution. Now panic made urgency bloom. My work could not remain singular, fragile against constant erasure. I needed something external, intact. I needed to see what had been documented before me, and whether this cycle had always ended in silence. I rubbed temples raw, whispering fragments I had once laughed at. It struck with brutal clarity. If past archives too had been breached, if tapes long ago also warped and dissolved, then everything I chased now was only repetition. A story endlessly consumed by the very signal it sought to capture. I could not bear that thought. My knees shook standing. Backpack spilled across floor as I hunted for blank notebooks, spare batteries, cold weather gear. Mountains waited with their sharp ridges, with their rumored vault. If any truth survived outside my Eaton drives, it lived there. I pressed my ear against the ruined hard disk one last time. At its center, the faintest hum still wavered, smug almost, as though mocking my scramble. I hurled it into the trash, yet the vibration clung through memory. Nothing is immune. That message pounded. Yet somewhere higher, farther, beyond normal networks, older relics may wait, brittle but alive. I scrawled coordinates in notebook margins, a point on a fractured map to guide me out. Urgency stabbed each line until pen tore paper. For the first time in weeks, purpose outran fear. If those archives still breathe, they hold witness unswallowed by this endless devouring. If they too lie breached, then it means all of us are only trudging illusions rehearsed before. Roles memorized yet forgotten, each cycle. My throat closed around that possibility. I strapped the pack tight before I could think deep enough to recoil. The choice had already been written. I must climb. The drive into the mountains took 2 days, the road thinning until it was more suggestion than pavement, shoulders eroded, snow leaning into the lanes. Each mile deeper, the network fell quieter, no bars, no signals, just the ache of the engine and my own pulse rehearsing itself too loudly. I carried only the recorder, notebooks, and the directions I'd copied from half-forgotten forum fragments. The coordinates led to a slope scarred by stone blasts, openings carved decades past for tunnels now abandoned. I hiked the last stretch on foot, boots slipping through slush, breath pulled sharp into lungs. When the bunker finally revealed itself, it looked like nothing. A cement mouth, dull and gray, part hidden by overgrowth. No antenna towers, no cameras, just a door rusted but locked. Somehow my body already knew the entrance was right. I knocked once, as if anyone might answer, then levered the lock until it surrendered. Inside smelled of iron and cold dust. The corridors narrowed, concrete sweating from decades of condensation. My flashlight stuttered across peeling paint, pipes dripping occasional notes like instruments accompanying my steps. Down 2 flights, I reached the vault itself, a metal chamber cored into the mountain. Climate steady, air sharp with frozen density. Inside stood rows and rows of shelves, each filled with identical boxes. Real cases, thousands. Labels scratched only with dates in block ink, spanning decades. The air itself seemed tuned. Every exhale I gave returned with vibration, my jaw humming faintly as though resonance here obeyed new mathematics. I walked slow, palms brushing cold metal, recording gear buzzing though switched off. The vault breathed around me with permanence and eerie patience. I pulled one case down, wiped frost from its lid. 1989 scrawled across in smudged blue. I threaded the tape through a rusted reel to reel still bolted to the corner. My thumb paused on the switch, body resisting. Then the wheel spun, reel's uncoiling sound buried 30 years. The playback rose with uncanny familiarity. Low pulses layered against faint harmonic quivers. Then allusions bloomed in descriptions on accompanying typed slips tucked into box. A crowd claimed to see cruciform light crossing rural skies. A township panicked after whispers bled through television static, urging assembly in parks. Voices transcribed matched my own recordings almost note for note. These were not prototypes. They were identical to what I had lived. My stomach caved. 30 years. Not future scheme. Present repetition. Ongoing machinery. Behind me footsteps cracked soft. I spun, heart jagged. My ally leaned in the doorway, her flashlight canted low. Her eyes refused mine, fixated on the reels. She spoke quiet, regret heavy in her tone. "This vault was not archive but cage," she said. "Not meant for retrieval, but containment. Every test locked here to keep resonance buffered against outer air. By opening boxes, by playing reels, I had peeled that barrier thin." Her voice the calm of someone steeped too long in knowledge. I tried to argue, but as though cued, the walls themselves vibrated. A low murmur reverberated, stone groaning with pulse. Dust drifted down in streams. The vault shook like chest cavity catching breath. My ally's hand seized mine, no hesitation. We ran together through the corridor, lights searing then choking. The mountain vibrated deeper than dynamite could force, frequency shaking stone ribs dotted the surface, air hit like rupture. We fell against snow, lungs tearing open, the bunker behind us whispering like it wasn't willing to stay shut. My hands sank into pack straps, gripping the cases I had dragged up in panicked reflex. They hummed still, soft but undeniable. Even in cold air, even beneath open sky, the reels carried resonance of their own. Quiet purrs against thin shells. I thought of leaving them buried under snow, but couldn't. My arms refused, hunger disguised as duty. My ally shook her head, backing away toward another trail. Her voice cracked into echo as she shouted that the reels would never rest, that I had broken quarantine. Then she disappeared into white fog, leaving me weighted. Tapes alive in my pack. In silence afterward, I crouched alone, mountains vast, air raw. Against frozen ribs of earth, the cases thrummed, faint lullabies not of safety, but persistence. My eyes watered, not only from cold, the cold vault existed, and I had carried its prisoners free. I returned home hollow, body still braced from the mountain's vibrations. The reels sat on my desk like relics dug from grave soil. Their plastic edges numbed my skin, yet they pulsed faint every time I drew closer, reminder that containment had been broken. For 2 nights, I stared without touching. But curiosity never loosens. By dawn of the 3rd, I had threaded vault tape onto the old reel machine, patched its line through my digital deck, and opened my files alongside. The moment they overlaid, the sound shifted. My recordings, murky with static, bent suddenly into coherence beside the old reels. Like puzzle halves snapping into precise lock, fragments decades apart aligned. Harmonics coiled together in patterns too deliberate to fall from chance. I stared sickly at the spectrum, lines no longer scattered, but weaving single tapestry. I slowed playback, dragged seconds into stretched minutes. What emerged stole my breath. The pulses cross-modulated into calendar. Spikes repeated at measured intervals, translating almost effortlessly into cycle schedule buried inside resonance. Dates already past matched Geneva, matched the suburban arcs, matched apparitions in Brazil. Each illusion had been foreseen, predicted inside the ghost ladder long ago. My jaw ached from clenching. I flipped notebook open, scribbling until pen fractured through page. The next interval blared clear. An upcoming date, soon, promising major pulse dwarfing the ones before. No accident. No improvisation. A controlled calendar of inductions stitched across generations. Shivers crawled spine. I had always feared random intrusion. Now horror was structure. A machine timetabled to sculpt perception on command. I listened longer despite cramps and gut warning stop. Eyes burned as flickers pressed against vision. At first faint impressions, the shimmer of script hovering above text, light splashes unbecoming in quiet room. I rubbed them away. But the longer I fed on tones, the sharper they grew. Symbols floating overhead, shimmering afterimage crawling against ceiling. Their angles precise, alien yet eerily familiar, like letters half remembered from childhood dream. I gripped desk edges until wood creaked. Because it was no longer recording, no longer illusion at distance. It was inside me, embedding. The sequences clawed cortex, shaping neurons into responsive glass. Every moment more I spent bent me into calibration. I staggered toward wall, tried to focus on shadow lines for grounding. Still, symbols glimmered, flaring each time pulse lifted in headphones. Tears sprang unasked, body unable to fight full assault. If I tore away then, damage might halt. But obsession pinned me. I had to log the schedule, had to finalize dates before memory dissolved. Pen stuttered across paper. Numbers lined, the code translating into cadence. Yet even on page, the digits misbehaved. Ink shimmered faint, outlines bending as though page itself had joined projection. My stomach flipped. Notes refused solidity. Every record risked bleeding to. My hand shook, whispering aloud as though sound might ground. The schedule predicted next surge not weeks away but days. A major event, scale larger than Geneva. Global this time, or something close. I scratched arrow marks deep into page, carving until notebook groaned. When exhaustion forced pause, I noticed my room quivering faint. Shelves trembled as though responding to unheard rhythm. My peripherals refused stillness. Walls flexed subtle with mirrored shimmer, symbols bleeding at corners. Reality itself ticked unstable, carried by tones now burned into me. I collapsed into chair, gripping sides for anchor. Breath shallow, pupils blown wide. Terror pressed heavy. These illusions no longer required projectors or repeater towers. Host now sat within skull itself, cortex harnessed by code. I realized with raw dread that the test had leapt inside me. I closed notebooks, shoved tape reels back into case, desperate to halt spread. Yet even sealed, they hummed faint, vibrations residing in furniture. In me. The numbers glared on paper, still bent. I knew them regardless. Dates climbing, points across future. Too neat, too inevitable to ignore. If this leak is true, then each interval will drag millions into sites they cannot disprove. Belief shredded. Consensus torched. I stared across boiling air of my small room. Whisper raw. What happens when global trust shatters on command? Midnight came unannounced, no different at first from dozens before. The city slouched into usual rest, windows dim, traffic thin to distant hum. I had left the recorder armed on my desk, notebook open beside it, trying not to watch the clock too intently. But the shift arrived sharp, a blade inside sound. Radios across the band ruptured at once. Not one station, not one frequency, everything. Layered tonality crashed over the air, chords folding onto chords in impossible ladders. My own tuner spat back waves so thick the meter slammed into red. Televisions blinked awake, though I had left mine unplugged. Screens fizzed with geometries, fractal triangles birthing circles, birthing more triangles. No origin, only endless recursion. I staggered to the window. Outside, the city thrashed in shared torment. People opened curtains only to reel back, clutching heads, some collapsing onto narrow sidewalks. Up beyond the skyline, structures erupted. Towers, but not towers of steel. Towers of light. Shimmering shapes ascended from avenues, perfect verticals, woven from luminescent fabric. They looked solid, undeniable. For a breath, my own pulse accepted their reality, convinced architecture had grown from thin air. Then the screaming began. Some knelt instantly in worship at bedroom windows. Others broke into sprint, fleeing streets as though towers might fall. Dogs howled, their bodies twisting against leashes. My own knees buckled under nausea, so strong I bent double at the waist. Still, instinct fought harder. I kept the recorder alive, narrating half moans, scribbles shaking across paper I could barely see. This wasn't rehearsal. No contained test on some village, no limited rehearsal disguised cleverly. This was deployment. The swell had arrived exactly as the tapes promised. One line of the calendar clawing into present fact. Buildings grown deep through bone. Glass rattled though air remained still. Shutters split themselves, forced open under vibration. Car alarms screamed in sudden chorus, sensors hijacked by resonance. Every wall echoed a frequency heavier than sound alone, resonance feeding through concrete into marrow. People stumbled from apartments into midnight roads. I saw figures collapse not from injury, but from saturation, bodies bent under invisible tide. I thought once about running too, but nausea pinned me in place. Better to document from wreck than drown unrecorded. I whispered the word pulse over and over, trying to control panic by naming. The recorder hissed with layered tonality. My voice nearly ripped beneath. Minutes dragged like eons. At their peak, the luminous towers shimmered so thick they crossed one another, weaving filaments into staggering crown above entire district. And then, as if guided by switch, silence fell. The geographies collapsed, folds of light unraveling in reverse. Shapes bled upward before vanishing altogether. Screens across cities snapped black. Radios hissed into ordinary static, but the streets remained touched, glowing faint. Pavement grimaced under sheen that looked like heat burn, yet no scorch marked when touched. A memory glow, a stain left by vision rather than by physics. For 10 long minutes the city lay in that afterimage, hushed but scarred by phantom geometry hanging behind their eyes. My recorder ticked onward until tape found its end, a final click loud in hollow room. Yet even in that silence my bones vibrated still. The tonality clung not to machines, but to tissue, humming inside marrow, low. Whenever I shut eyes, towers returned in negative, tall phantoms pinned under lids. Something irreversible had broken tonight. The pulse had moved from diagrams and forecasts into undeniable saturations of flesh and street alike. Geneva had been rehearsal. This was command, and the hum lingered behind silence, whispering through body far beyond machines, promising the calendar still had more lines to cross dot in the morning. The city looked unchanged, almost untouched. Cars moved again. Commuters clutched coffee. Dogs barked against leashes. Only the eyes betrayed it. Avoidance, agitation, wide stares at nothing. Official voices took the stage before noon. Anchors smiled clean, declared the towers nothing more than collective hysteria. Strong imaginations. Shared rumors spiraling after a blackout. The word hallucination repeated until its edges dulled. They scrubbed footage, pulled archives down one by one, but thousands of clips had already spread. Independent, shaky, low light, poor compression, yet identical. Filaments of luminous structure across different blocks, mirrored arcs dissolving upward. The footage aligned too perfectly to excuse as chaos. Deniers called it tampering. Believers insisted none of them edited, that even toddlers saw the towers. The arguments multiplied with frightening speed. Families fractured at kitchen tables. Couples stared across plates of untouched food, one swearing reality bent, the other refusing to believe. Even closer to home, the contradiction scraped me raw. A neighbor swore her house collapsed into blinding light, roof and walls gone. Yet at dawn everything stood intact, furniture unmoved. Another insisted 2 blocks vanished entirely, only to return after sunrise. They cried while recounting. Others ridiculed them openly. Disbelief cut sharper than knives. I sorted files survivors sent me. Each corrupted, each burdened by same faint track and background. A whisper not always audible, yet transcriptions produced alike. Low voices repeating, "Belief is scaffold, belief is scaffold." The phrase echoed so consistently, it carved into me, not as coincidence. Intention lived inside that murmur. An explanation and a taunt both. Institutions tightened silence. Every press release carved vagueness into stone. Psychologists lined panels, rehearsing phrases about suggestive trauma, brain's tendency to weave events under stress. Yet simultaneously, accounts poured private, raw, and unsilenced. Every suppression only multiplied them faster. When platforms stripped archives clean, mirrors appeared by morning. Every deletion was treated as proof the towers were undeniable. Consensus, foundation of shared trust, crumbled like plaster dust. The more we argued, the less agreement existed on even plain matters, whether light burned the streets, whether towers stretched skyward, whether houses blinked out and back. Contrary truths grew teeth. People chose camps instead of certainty. My ally's silence gutted me through it all. After the vault, after the warning that tapes weren't archive but prison, I thought she would return, help me shoulder this choke of knowledge. But she was gone now. Number disconnected. Apartment empty. Steps erased as if she'd never lived nearby. I whispered her name into recorder at night, but received no answer but static. The weight left me trembling. Sorting through clip after clip, notebook stuffed with contradictory witness accounts, I realized my role had shifted. I no longer cataloged phenomena against blank backdrop. I sat in the breach itself, between halves of worlds splitting apart. Whatever trust once glued consensus together had melted, and the system widened fractures deliberately, feeding questions until we no longer agreed, even on sight itself. I pressed headphones tight, forcing myself to listen deeper to survivor files. Whisper always the same. Belief is scaffold. At first translation, then revelation. If trust formed architecture, a single pulse could shatter foundation, leaving only scaffolding to be rebuilt in any shape by those who held the frequency codes. Migraine swelled through temples as I realized nothing could contain this eruption. Not institutions, not governments, not silence. Proof multiplied faster than suppression could erase. Files cloned into 1,000 mirrors, even while headlines preached dismissal. I shut the recorder off and simply sat in twilight of my room, pressing palms to my face. Consensus reality had stopped breathing. What filled air now was fracture too bold to mend, and me, alone, ally vanished, stood in its breach without shield. I sit at the desk that no longer feels like mine, exhaustion thick in every tendon. The recorder blinks red. My voice trembles, but I tell myself it doesn't matter. This isn't comfort. It is testimony. The reels from the vault, my surviving files, the river of public footage, they have all converged into one architecture I can't misinterpret anymore. Lines overlay, pulses align, the pattern stares back undeniable. Every thread leads to the same lattice. The reach is not subtle anymore. It doesn't need concrete towers or hovering satellites in every case. It doesn't even need to replace the world. Only belief. If vision can fracture across a city, if neighbors can no longer agree on whether their roofs collapsed or whether towers rose from streets, then consensus is dead. Truth becomes scaffolding. Whoever tunes the signal gets to build the new shape atop our ruins. I cough into my sleeve. The headache has lived behind my eyes for days now. Yet even beneath my own hoarse syllables, I can hear it, the hum living inside the tape, bleeding without permission. My machine transmits in real time, but now my body feels like the conduit. Each word I speak vibrates faint with that familiar undertow, as if woven into the frequency web dot. Maybe the signal found new relay. Maybe I'm the chamber now. My lungs carry it. My jaw propagates it. The microphone only records what's already flowing through me. I can't tell whether I am resisting contagion or performing its next evolution. Still, I force my words out louder, voice raw, narrating with all the breath I've got left. Someone has to hold the record intact, even if it infects while telling. The vault reels already proved it was never about beginning or end. This cycle had been spinning 30 years at least. I may already be swallowed. But until silence overwhelms, I confess, I flip open my notebook, ink warped from too many hands. Dates glare up at me, the calendar hidden in modulation. All the intervals, Geneva, the suburb collapse, the apparitions, the pulse, My fingers trace the neck, still waiting. The numbers bend as if glowing on the page, threatening to lift free. My body shivers. I refuse to look away. They don't have to erase physics. They only need to corrupt witness. If no one can agree, if memory and record fracture, then command is secure. I've watched footage multiply faster every time it was denied. I've listened to neighbors scream truth into uncomprehending ears. I've felt my own speech bent into other cadences on tape. There is no solid anchor. That's the true architecture belief displaced. Facts are scaffolds. The hum rewrites mortar until minds cling to whatever shape falls easiest into them. I sit straighter and keep my voice steady, though my throat dries. I tell myself this may be the only piece of signal I own. Not protection, not cage, but truth thrown into air. My recorder isn't neutral anymore, but perhaps someone will still hear words laced inside the tone. Behind lids, luminous afterimages shiver. Towers still loom whenever eyes close. They bleed into this room, faint geometry crawling along plaster like mold. Once I would panic, claw back into dark. Now I simply describe it, because pretending otherwise is worse. I fear already the tape isn't just logging. It's broadcasting through me, imprinting itself in every listener. If you're out there hearing, then maybe I've already lost distinction. Maybe my warning is only scaffold in itself, but silence is worse. If all vanish holding their tongues, then the story repeats, swallowed every cycle as vault reels proved. So I push on. I leave nothing unsaid. I know the towers were real, regardless of denial. I know the voices in the silence whispered through more mouths than mine. I know the vault reels survived decades only to hum back awake when touched with light. None of this ends with me. Still, I force one image clear. Me seated, voice trembling but live, tape spinning. My confession-marking line in this abyss. The hum thickens under syllables until my chest rattles. My throat catches. Perhaps this is the point, the moment relay completes. My vision blurs, screen glowing too bright. I can't tell anymore if sound belongs to me or not. I steady my hand, palms splayed against desk. My last line falls softer, almost whisper. Someone must know. Even if my voice bends, someone must hear. I broadcast these tapes though fear stains every second. I leave them open for whatever ear intercepts. I accept consequence because choice is gone. And if you are hearing this now, then the door is already open.